The Weaver Bride is a 2025 young adult fantasy romance novel by Lydia Gregovic. It had a pretty cover. Yes, I'm one of those mindless suckers that's easily drawn into a book by the cover. What can I say? Marketing degrees exist for a reason. As it happens, I'm not the only one who thought the cover and premise were intriguing, so I had to wait a few weeks before this one was available as an audiobook from my library. So, The Weaver Bride. Story takes place in an alternate world, a place called Balmoral. Bearing in mind that I listened to this as an audiobook, I could be mispronouncing this, but I think it's Balmoral, like Balmoral Castle in Scotland. I apologize. Usually I try to secure a physical or ebook version of the book I'm reviewing so that I can make sure I'm getting this sort of thing right, but there wasn't one available on Kindle Plus or my local library, and for reasons I'll soon be getting into, I am not buying a copy. So Balmoral is, I think, the country that this is set in, or kingdom. And in this fantasy world, country, kingdom, whatever, some women are born as silk witches. Their hair contains magic, and they possess something called a wit, which is like a special little magical power of their own. Silk witches are required to be bound in marriage to weavers, that being male sorcerers. Once married, the weavers harvest the silk witch's hair before her magic eventually runs out. As such, the law of the land is that silk witches have to be married by 21 years old or be sent off to the cloisters. We don't get a whole lot of detail about the cloisters, but they're implied to be unpleasant and no one has ever come back from them. Our main character, Levitt Tamerlane, is a silk witch living in secret and stealing for a living, something made much easier by the fact that her wit allows her to open any locked door, as well as low-key visualize the rooms around her telepathically. She is basically blackmailed into assisting a guy named Elliot Lear into investigating the death of his sister Ophelia at the previous Vainglory. What's a Vainglory? I'm so glad you asked! It's The Bachelor! I mean the selection. I mean the rose bargain. I mean the competition for Prince Noe's hand in marriage. A bunch of the Silk Witch girls go to the palace and have to compete in challenges to win him over. I feel like I've done a lot of setup for the world building and situation here, but the remainder of the story is very, straightforward, in retrospect. Levitt enters the Vainglory, Prince Noe starts to fall for her, she and Elliot begin to fall for one another, she does some investigation into Ophelia's death, and then at the end it's revealed that the Weavers, again these are male sorcerers, actually have no magic at all and are literally stealing their wives' magic once they marry a Silk Witch, which is why their magic runs dry eventually. It's also why unmarried Silk Witches get sent to the cloisters, because if they're left out in public, everyone will eventually realize that Silk Witches only lose their powers if they marry. There's a cliffhanger at the end of the book that clearly sets us up for a sequel. Levitt made a choice that just kind of felt weird and out of left field for me, but I'm gonna leave that one particular twist up to you if you end up reading the book. Alright. First impression of this novel. Very similar to The Rose Bargain. Historical fantasy setting. Rose Bargain was set in an alternate England in 1848. I get the vibe that Weaver Bride is channeling roughly the Victorian era. Magic plays a significant role in the story. Characters have a special power unique to themselves. In Rose Bargain, they're gifted by the Queen. In The Weaver Bride, it's only Silk Witches that have it naturally. There's a bachelor-like competition for the prince's hand in marriage. The main characters are trying to solve mysteries. And there's a love triangle with the main female character, the prince, and another highborn dude. So there's a lot of shared features here. I believe my first recommendation video on my main channel was for The Rose Bargain. I have all my book videos over here now, but on Jenny from the Block, I used to do books and video games. So if you want to go see that video, it's over there. I think I posted it in February of 2025. I thought it was a pretty good fantasy romance story that did a decent job of developing its characters and romances, and I felt that the main character, Ivy, was an interesting main character. I also thought the trials that the girls in The Rose Bargain had to go through were exciting, frightening, and very creative. I enjoyed the book, and I plan on reading the sequel when it comes out. The Weaver Bride has given me a deeper appreciation for The Rose Bargain because, in my opinion, it shows how a decent concept can hit or fail depending on how it's executed. And in my opinion, The Weaver Bride failed to do a lot of the things that The Rose Bargain succeeded at. First, there was a failure to develop the characters in any deep or meaningful way. Levitt Tamerlane is a bit ruthless and clever. That's it. Her internal dialogue barely goes any deeper than what's going on in front of her right now. In The Rose Bargain, I had a good sense of who Ivy was and why she made the choices she made. I had a good sense of her family and her history and, the things that were important to her. Levitt? I barely have any idea who she is beyond the veneer of hardened, street-smart girl. The other characters suffer much the same. Prince Noe and Elliot Lear are the two other characters with the most page time, and I barely know who they are by the end of this book. Their personalities are not fleshed out at all. Elliot is a slightly icy, clever rich boy who clearly loved his sister, and is implied to be refusing marriage to a Silk Witch so as to protest the stealing of their powers. Noe is charming and jealous. That's about it. Deeper motivations, personalities beyond that? Couldn't find them. But wait, I hear you say. I read The Selection, and I read The Rose Bargain, and in both of those books, the contestants competing against the main character were big parts of the plot. Sure, they didn't deeply characterize all of them, but a handful of the girls were usually fleshed out pretty well, especially the ones that made it to the end of the challenge. How did Levitt's competition fare in this book? I'm so glad you asked. They are borderline non-existent. I think only two of Levitt's competitors, Civil and Anais, were semi-significantly featured. And I use the word significantly loosely here because they were barely present in the narrative at all. If you've read The Rose Bargain or Kira Cass's The Selection series and are thinking that Levitt being in close quarters with her fellow Silk Witches and competitors is going to be a major factor in the plot, well, it's not. it's just not. What's really fascinating to me, going off of that, is how little the Weaver Bride focused on the actual competition. There's an element of this that makes sense from Levitt's perspective. She's initially there to do a job for Elliot, not to actually win. But the book itself barely seems concerned with the trials the girls are put through. In The Rose Bargain, these were big, significant events that often involve magic and some element of tension, danger, excitement. In The Weaver Bride, it's like, oh, okay, a challenge, and it's over. Yeah, they weren't that interesting. The challenges were also very solitary. It's not until the final challenge that Levitt is put head-to-head with one of the girls. All of the challenges that came before that I recall correctly, were challenges done solo. She doesn't compete against the other girls directly, but she also doesn't watch them performing their challenges. Girls get eliminated, and it doesn't matter because Levitt, and by association the audience, doesn't know who they are and doesn't care either. Maybe it's not fair to do so, but even though I read it almost a year ago, I can't help but compare this book to The Rose Bargain. It was way more exciting and suspenseful than Weaver Bride, not just in the competition aspect, but in others too. Okay, so this is a fantasy, yeah? And there's magic? Except that while magic is definitely, there in the story, it's very rarely used or invoked in an interesting way. Again, in The Rose Bargain, magic is a constant presence in the story. It is consistently influencing the plot and being used in new and impressive ways. In Weaver Bride, it's just kind of there. The idea of Silk Witches having magic hair and their individual wits is a fascinating concept, but it doesn't really get used to its full potential here. Then you have the mystery element. Ophelia Lear died after falling from a cliff. Ooh, was she murdered or was it really an accident? The ruling family is quite sus. There's something they're hiding. There seems to be a conspiracy. And yet, all of these things were just pulled off in such, in my opinion, the dullest way possible. That the Weavers were stealing the Silk Witch's magic was a fairly satisfying conclusion to the what are the royals hiding mystery, but Ophelia's death just ended up being an honest accident, and the investigation into it was just not very interesting. But the romance, right? That's the big focus of the book. This is a romantasy book. A lot of time is spent with Levitt being overcome with this curious feeling in her chest when she's around Elliot, and she is so perplexingly concerned with how he views her. And then they get into this will they, won't they, we want to be together, but we mustn't thing. And again, it's all just so boring. I think I've said this before in other reviews, but romance books always suffer when characterization is weak. Smut will do fine. You just need to bring the frick-a-frack and the audience will be happy with you. But romances predominantly work on feelings and personality, and when a character's personality is just not that deep, it leads me to kind of cock my head when they start expressing such passionate desire for their love interest. There is a point in this book where Elliot does the romantasy thing where the male love interest does the big dumb speech about how the female main character is just the nicest and bestest person in the whole wide world and how much it kills him that she doesn't know how good and pure and beautiful she is. And it's like, bruh, you barely know her. I can believe the big dumb speech in other novels, romantasy or not, because other novels might have actually given their characters personalities. And I can then conclude that yes, it's absolutely reasonable that you would feel such big, passionate love for this person. I've seen what attracts you to them. Again, Rose Bargain did this pretty well. I understood why Ivy was attracted to her love interest, and I understand why they would be attracted to her. It worked. In The Weaver Bride, bruh, I have no earthly idea why Lovett and Elliot are into each other. At first I thought Prince Noé was manipulating Lovett, but then at the end he was playing it like, no, actually I do love you, Lovett, and I want to be with you. And I likewise don't know what she was seeing in him throughout the book because we spend even less time with Noé than we do with Elliot. All of the hand-wringing about Elliot hesitating to be with Lovett just becomes so tedious because I barely know who either of these people are or why I should even be invested in them getting together. This book just to me personally, my opinion, fails in a lot of storytelling aspects. It doesn't deliver on the fantasy, doesn't deliver on the mystery, doesn't deliver on the romance. It barely develops its world, magic system, or its characters. The writing wasn't terrible, but it featured a lot of over-explanation and telling instead of showing, It's not great, but it's also really, really, really common in young adult literature, and so I can't necessarily lean too hard into it unless it takes it to an extreme. You're just gonna find a lot of telling instead of showing in the young adult genre. I feel bad. I feel like this is an awfully short and not as in-depth of a review as I usually try to do, but there's just not a lot to say. I kept waiting for this book to get interesting, and by the time we got to the end and the conspiracy about the Silk Witches was revealed, it was like, okay, there's the answer, and it only took us 15 hours of listening time to get here? Okay, for me it was like 7.5 because I ended up listening to it on double speed, but still! And again, I must concede that I am somewhat outvoted here because as of this recording, The Weaver Bride has a 3.87 star rating on Goodreads, with nearly 1,500 people contributing to that average. Not quite the damning consensus that A Court of Thorns and Roses or Fourth Wing can claim, but the majority of people who read this book enjoyed it, and so I have to accept that the target audience has more or less enjoyed the book. So I figure if you like stuff like The Selection or Rose Bargain, you might like this one. Just be aware that it's not going to be quite as exciting as either of those books were.